as I said on the steps of Downing Street, we're not going to wait until October the 31st before getting on with our plans to take this country forward. And to do that, we need new legislation. We've got to be bringing forward new and important bills, and that's why we are going to have a Queen's speech, and we're going to do it on October the 14th. And we've got to move ahead now with a new legislative programme.
Prime Minister, to do that Queen's speech, you will need to prorogue Parliament for several days. Your critics will say this is an insult to democracy and denying the MPs the time they need to debate and possibly vote on Brexit.
No, well, that is completely untrue. If you look at what we're doing, we're bringing forward a new legislative programme on crime, on hospitals, making sure that we have the education funding that we need. And there will be ample time on both sides of that crucial October the 17th summit, ample time in Parliament for MPs to debate the EU, to debate Brexit, and all the other issues. Ample time.
Prime Minister, you seem to have an ambitious domestic agenda, but your government does not have a majority. Even with the DUP, it only barely has a majority. Should we take from this that you are planning a general election before the end of this year?
No, all you should take from this is we're doing exactly what I said on the steps of Downing Street, which is that we must get on now with our legislative domestic agenda.
We may not even know by the 14th of October whether you're going to get a deal, and the outlook could be quite different whether you do or whether you don't. So what have you got to say to the public who may be concerned about the economic outlook?
We need to get on with our domestic agenda, and that's why we're announcing a Queen's speech for October the 14th.
Well, they can say what they like, but this is a parliamentary coup. The length of the time that Parliament is prorogued is 5 weeks, and that's way in excess of anything that's been done before. It's been prorogued by leading Brexiteers visiting the Queen. It's very useful for them because Parliament will not have the opportunity to vote and clearly vote on a deal with the European Union. The majority in Parliament, the majority of the British people, do not want to leave the EU if it means a no-deal exit. This is quite clear. It's not a tiny little 52 to 48% majority here. It's very clear. But what's this going to mean? There's going to be a lot of reaction to this, and it's going to be ongoing. What's happening right now, as I'm filming this, is that multiple cities across England, Scotland, Wales, and I think Northern Ireland are having public demonstrations. They are calling this a coup. Feelings are running very, very high. This is going to cause an awful lot of instability, and instability the government does not like because it causes the economy to crash. The pound's already plummeting downwards and I expect it to fall further. But what's going to be the result of this? Well, when they do finally get together in September to meet briefly before they're on an enforced vacation for 5 weeks, so the British government do not have a majority in Parliament and can be overthrown like that. The only reason they haven't been is that they gave, I think, $1 billion to the DUP, which is a tiny, tiny extreme version of unionists in Northern Ireland. And that is what's propping up their government. The question is, will some of the Conservative members of Parliament vote to bring down the government? I think quite clearly, if this continues the way it is, the answer will be yes. Jeremy Corbyn has met with all the leaders of the opposition, and I believe on this issue they will bring down the government. And I hope they do. When a government acts against the will of the majority of its people and seeks to bully and silence its own members of Parliament on laughable grounds, this is not a government that cares anything about the NHS or crime particularly. They're very focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is a no-deal Brexit. They believe that having exited from the EU with no deal at all, they will be safe from any attempt to try and confiscate their money that they've got stored up in offshore accounts. This is what this is all about.
So I've protested in the strongest possible terms on behalf of my party, and I believe all the other opposition parties are going to join in with this, in simply saying that suspending Parliament is not acceptable, it's not on. What the Prime Minister is doing is a sort of smash and grab on our democracy in order to force through a no-deal exit from the European Union. What's he so afraid of that he needs to suspend Parliament to prevent Parliament discussing these matters? So when Parliament does meet, on his timetable very briefly next week, the first thing we'll do is attempt legislation to prevent what he's doing, and secondly, will challenge him on a motion of confidence at some point.
Would you go as far to say that this would be a constitutional outrage?
It is a constitutional outrage. This is an attempt by a Prime Minister who was elected by a very small number of people in the country as a Conservative Party membership to ride roughshod over Parliament and prevent any legislation or debate that would stop this country leaving the EU without a deal and all the problems that it will cause. This is extraordinary. He needs to be held to account by Parliament, not by shutting down Parliament, but by attending Parliament and answering the questions. Johnson, our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, needs to be held to account by Parliament. All he's doing is running away from Parliament.
The Prime Minister says MPs will still have ample time to discuss Brexit matters as well as other matters. Is our MPs really going to lose that much time, considering this is over conference season? There won't be too many sitting days lost.
He's losing a whole week of it, and he's delaying the return to Parliament after what's known as the conference recess. And he knows full well that his intention is to prevent Parliament holding him to account.
Will you join other MPs in continuing to sit in what's being called by some as a People's Parliament? And I know that Shadow Minister Clive Lewis also was saying that call on people to take to the streets.
We will do everything we can, and we will join everybody else in doing that. I hosted a meeting of all opposition party leaders yesterday, and we reached an agreement on what we will do next week, and we will continue working together with everyone who wants to prevent this smash and grab against our democracy by the Prime Minister.
Has allowed this to happen. Now, every member of the opposition party and many MPs, as is their right, are demanding meetings with the Queen to express that they do disagree heartily that what she's done in any way promotes constitutional democracy in the United Kingdom, and they're quite right. As I also speak, the Wales Parliament, they have their own parliaments now, is meeting. I imagine they're not going to be very happy. Scotland is probably going to seek to leave the Union if this continues, and I think they'll get the majority this time. And I actually think that's a great thing. I'm English, but I do think Scotland should be independent. For too long they've been controlled by England, by the Westminster Parliament, and it has never acted in Scotland's interests. So I do think that the United Kingdom will break up, which is interesting because the DUP is the party that wants the Union not to break up. People are saying it doesn't matter about Northern Ireland can go back to Ireland, etc., etc. Totally ignoring history, totally ignoring the risks here. This is going to possibly cause violence. I can well see some bombs going off and some assassinations going off in Northern Ireland in the next few weeks because of this. I can well see mass demonstrations getting increasingly angry on the streets of England and Scotland and Wales as we progress forward in time. Now, obviously, when they meet in September, if the government falls, there'll be an election. The election won't have time to settle anything before the United Kingdom is expelled from Europe at its own request. I think at this point, Article 51 needs to be revoked. This needs to be put to a general election, a straightforward general election. Do you want to stay in the EU or do you want to leave, even if that means no deal? And I think that's what they need to be doing. And on party lines as well, because people are very, very sick of this. People seem to think that it'll be a wobble and it'll be fine. I don't think this will be a wobble. This is a circumvention of parliamentary democracy, using the tools of parliamentary democracy. All dictators start out by using tools that are available to them, and then once they've seized the power that way, they dismantle the tools. It's a very, very sad day for me. British parliamentary democracy has a lot of faults, but it's a strong and robust organisation, and I do hope they get together. I'm going to put up some tweets and some stuff like that so you can see what the reaction is, but stay tuned to this one. Although you might not live in the United Kingdom or even in Europe, this is going to have a definitive effect on how governments treat opposition in democracies in the West. I think we're going to see if Boris Johnson accepts and is accepted what he's doing and gets what he wants against the will of the majority of the British people and against the will of the MPs. I think you'll see other Western leaders be more keen to crush, silence, circumvent opposition. And let's face it, that is not in anybody's interest. Anyway, stay tuned to this story. It isn't a minor story. This is a coup. It's a coup d'etat. It's been handled by a minority of MPs who are extremely rich, who are doing this for self-serving interest, not for the good of the British people. They've managed to sell it to a few people in Britain as a good idea, but the majority of the British people never supported just abandoning the EU like a messy divorce. They never did, and they certainly don't now. And I think you're going to see hundreds of thousands and probably tens of thousands for sure, but even maybe in the millions, pouring out onto the streets this weekend. I do think this is going to reverberate for a long, long time. And I do think the result of this will be the fall of the British government, probably in the early September. If they do hang on, I think that's going to be a very, very bad thing for British democracy in the long haul. In SHTF, if you don't prepare, tomorrow will always be worse than today. And I'm not sure how tomorrow is going to look for Britain, but I certainly am not visiting there until this gets sorted out. I remember pub bombings in the 80s, 70s and 80s and 90s, and I lived in a port town. It's not anybody's interest to start the troubles up again for whatever reason, and it's certainly not in anybody's interest to basically force Scotland and possibly Wales into leaving the Union, and I can well see that happening if this continues the way it is. Little England is ascendant. They need to be brought to heel by the majority of people in Britain. I'm a proud British person, but I do think the time has come for me to apply for Canadian citizenship and give up my British passport. I am appalled and disgusted at what's going on over there, and it's about time the British people stopped the racism, the greed and the lying.